President Donald Trump was back at the New York Attorney General for his second deposition in a legal battle over his company's business practices, all in the matter of 1 week. The former U.S. President answered questions for nearly 7 hours Thursday during his second deposition in a legal battle with New York's Attorney General over his company's business practices. This reversing an earlier decision to invoke his Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination and remain silent. The former president was sued by Letitia James. Her lawsuit claims Trump and his family misled banks and business associates by giving them false information about his net worth and the value of assets such as hotels and even golf courses. Now, James has sued Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump and even Ivanka Trump, his daughter, in September last year, alleging they committed indelible fraud at the Trump Organization. Her lawsuit asserts that they lied to tax collectors, lenders and even insurers for years in a scheme that routinely misstated the value of the organization's properties just to enrich themselves. But also remember, this lawsuit is completely unrelated to the felony criminal charges that were filed against the former president by the Manhattan District Attorney, which led last week to his historic arraignment, the first for any president. Now, reacting for the first time in a social media post on Thursday, Donald Trump called the suit ridiculous, just like all of the other election interference cases that have been brought against him.
More dire threat to the American way of life than the corruption and weaponization of our justice system. And it's happening all around us. If we cannot restore the fair and impartial rule of law, we will not be a free country. As president, it will be my personal mission to restore the scales of justice in America. We will have fairness and equality under the law. And to that end, I will appoint U.S. attorneys who will be the polar opposite of the Soros district attorneys and others that are being appointed throughout the United States. Very unfair to our population, very unfair to our country. They will be the 100 most ferocious legal warriors against crime and communist corruption that this country has ever seen. As we completely overhaul the Federal Department of Justice and FBI, we will also launch sweeping civil rights investigations into Marxist local district attorneys. And that's what we have. They're Marxists in many cases. By refusing to charge countless crimes, these Soros prosecutors appear to be engaging in selective enforcement based on illegal racial discrimination. In Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and every other city where these maniacs have taken over, the DA's offices should face federal subpoenas of their staff, their emails, and their records to determine whether they have blatantly violated federal civil rights law. As part of this effort, there should be a federal inquiry into the Soros prosecutor in Austin, Texas, who charged a veteran with murder for defending himself against a threat by a heavily armed member of a radical left mob. I will also order the Department of Justice to establish a task force on protecting the right to self-defense, which is under siege nationwide. In addition, we will have a complete investigation into the use of police state tactics by federal authorities to arrest conservatives and Christians. We will find out who ordered it, and we will hold them totally accountable. There is much more that we must do. We have to confront this radicalized law in schools. You take a look at what they've done to our schools, our beautiful schools. We have to reform the far-left bar associations and stop the purge of conservative lawyers from major law firms. I will do whatever it takes to save our legal system among the greatest achievements of Western civilization from the Marxist barbarians who seek to destroy it. And we will do that. We will save it. Thank you very much.
Let's also first bring in our colleague Sanjay Suru. He, in fact, has been keeping a close eye on all those developments. Sanjay, very interesting times. You had the former president, Donald Trump, being back in front of the Attorney General, this time around in a very separate case than what we saw last week. Help us understand what really happened. We are understanding he answered questions for a good 7 hours.
Well, he was confronted at length, and the fact that he answered questions for 7 hours means that he was confronted very closely and confronted with a mass of detail, because let's not forget, this second case is potentially far more serious, even if less colorful than the earlier one. The earlier one was about how accounting details and entries were made in to cover up some sort of payment for sexual services. This one is a systemic and systematic complaint. This is about continuing wrongdoing, at least as the allegations go. This is about accounting irregularities that have been not limited to any particular transaction, but as a fundamental and ongoing way of conducting business, where the allegations suggest that there has been cover up and misleading information in relation to the accounting facts. This is a far more serious case.
Yeah.
7 hours probably is just the start of it.
Sanjay, what I also want to understand, there was a very interesting development that happened. Initially, we were understanding he is going to invoke the fifth, but then there was a reversing of that decision. Do we understand any details from his legal team, possibly, or others, of why that happened?
Well, we don't know exactly what the final defense will be. We heard from Trump at length a minute back, and this is what he is calling a propaganda, a witch hunt, where he is being targeted. He is speaking of Marxist barbarians. He is speaking of this whole campaign to vilify him and to target him in ways he says that are unjust. He is speaking about reclaiming America and rescuing it from these leftists, as he calls them. This is now a matter that will be decided not by rhetoric or even by fundamental constitutional questions or interpretations. This will be decided primarily by the facts and the evidence before the court. This is about a wrongdoing in accounting, and these are facts and this is data that is entered, accounted for. It is transparent to an extent, to the extent that investigators can take a look at these entries and see whether this business was conducted properly. And this is when Trump speaks of Marxist barbarians, he speaks of constitutional issues. This is really sidetracking the issue. This is primarily, and in fact, as far as the courts and the procedures go in fact and law, only about the accounting declarations that have been made on behalf of several Trump organizations and businesses, and whether these stand scrutiny in terms of facts and law.
Yeah. Sanjay, what I also essentially want to understand, this entire lawsuit which was filed is not just targeting the former president, but the other children of Donald Trump have been named as well, like Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump. Have we heard anything from their legal teams as well?
Well, it's going to be one big family because, well, if it's a family business, it stands to reason that if there's an investigation and an allegation, that would cover the family. And if they're in this together, all of them, then their defense would necessarily have a commonality to it. There is not an allegation. There is not an allegation at the moment that they have run separate businesses, unconnected with one another, each going its own way, each independent of the other, and to be then investigated for then the different family members to present separate defenses. This is almost a conspiracy of the family, so far as the allegations go. And therefore, this is all being roped in together in a collective bunch of allegations. And the defense, correspondingly, will have to have a degree of commonality, even if it's not an entirely joint defense.
Sanjay, now I want to just talk to you about the larger issue, something that we discussed even last week when the arraignment happened. What does all of these legal troubles, lawsuits, legal problems mean for Donald Trump come 2024? Last week, we heard from him that even if I'm convicted, I'm going to go forward with my plans. But realistically speaking, how are analysts seeing these developments vis-a-vis the possibility of Donald Trump becoming the president once again?
It'll really depend upon how this goes. We've seen the allegations, we've seen the details of the allegations in the first case, now the second, these are emerging, and the 7 hours is only the start of it. We're going to see very much more coming out. And if these allegations turn out to have a legal basis, and if that basis is examined by a court and upheld by a court, if there were to be a conviction, by a court, then it's going to become very difficult for Donald Trump. If, on the other hand, this process takes a while, and we know that in the first case, the next hearing is in November of this year, then we are getting very close to the nomination time in the Republican race. And if then Trump is going into that nomination race with this hanging over him and these allegations swirling around him, there will be a question that Republicans will have to ask themselves whether they want to put up as candidate for president somebody who is facing very serious and very credible allegations. If, on the other hand, this case were to collapse before then Trump would be vindicated to the extent that he
Sure.
will be able to claim quite legitimately that there was no basis to these allegations. So, really, this will depend primarily on how the court cases proceed. And if they were to continue, if there was to be no conclusion at the time of the nomination race, there still would be a
Yeah.
question how far Republicans will want to back a candidate for president, no less, who is facing allegations one after the other that do appear quite credible.
Sanjay, I just want to go back to something that you pointed out, because you said if you compare both these issues of the arraignment last week and him appearing before the Attorney General this week, this case is far more serious. And I agree with that point, because this is about financial irregularities. So I just want to understand, as far as this lawsuit and the allegations are concerned, is there any specific time that is also mentioned when these irregularities happened?
Well, these cover a number of years, and this is covering also a number of businesses. We are talking not about a transaction here. We are not talking about a deal that was made between a particular Trump company and another, or a particular statement or entry in certain records of any Trump company. We are talking about continuing business, and this is a practice that is being examined, a whole practice of misreporting as the allegations go. And this necessarily is not limited to one particular business deal that could potentially have happened where the Trump organizations could have been accused of entering into a particular business deal and misrepresenting facts to the other, or making declarations that were false or misleading. This
Okay.
goes beyond that. This goes to fundamental practices that are alleged to be illegal and
Okay.
to be deceptive, of the deceptive in the
Sure.
to the extent that they are not representing facts fully as required by law in reporting procedures to the authorities concerned.
Yeah. Sanjay, we leave this conversation for now, but we'll request you to stay on with us for our stories that we want to discuss after this as well. But for now, let's also bring in our guest. We have Professor Scott Lucas, International Affairs expert, Emeritus Professor of International Policies, University of Birmingham at United Kingdom. Professor Scott Lucas, thank you so much for taking our time and joining us here. I want to first understand, as I was discussing with my colleague as well, just in a matter of about 10 days, you've had the legal troubles for the former President Donald Trump only increasing. If you had to compare both the cases, which do you think is more problematic?
I think they're all problematic. They are at different stages. So let's work through the facts very carefully. Of course, the most advanced case now is that Donald Trump is indicted on felony charges, not misdemeanor, but felony charges. And that, of course, is over the payoffs, in fact, for women with whom he allegedly had sexual encounters to buy their silence, so it would not affect his election in 2016. But you also have a case which is well advanced and could lead to an indictment in Georgia, in the southern U.S., about alleged election interference by Trump and his allies, trying to overturn the 2020 vote in which Joe Biden was victorious. Then you have a civil case in New York, which is moving towards trial on charges of business fraud. And last but certainly not least, you have investigations, including at the federal level, of Trump's election denial and his alleged incitement of violence in the Capitol attack of January 2021.
So I want to understand, just speaking specifically as far as allegations of this particular lawsuit is concerned, these are problematic on various levels. One, allegations are not just against the former president, but various family members and children of his as well. The allegations say that various family members and the former president included actually lied to various banks as far as their businesses and property is concerned, and this happened over a sustained period of time. If these allegations are proven, how problematic could it be?
Again, it's problematic, but it's not new for Donald Trump, his children, and the Trump organization. You may remember a few years ago that to avoid further charges, there was a settlement in which the Trump organization's charity, the Trump Foundation, closed and had to repay millions of dollars. Last autumn, the Trump organization was found guilty in a criminal court, and it was fined heavily because of business malpractice. That was over benefits to its employees. The most serious case, which involves Trump's children as well as Trump, is a civil case, not a criminal case, but it does mean possible large fines and personal liability over this alleged misreporting, I would say false reporting of business transactions.
I want to now understand, what did you make of this reversement of decision of wanting to not invoke the fifth first and then, or wanting to invoke the fifth initially and then going forward and not wanting to do it? Why do you think that change happened?
Well, Donald Trump goes back and forth on this. I mean, Donald Trump said repeatedly during, for example, the Trump-Russia investigation, oh, I'll testify, and then effectively refused to testify. Donald Trump has said in previous cases, I'll testify, and then, as you mentioned, has taken the fifth, including in the New York civil investigation. So even though Trump may come out publicly again and try to gaslight the media, I'm completely open, I'll testify, he could well invoke the fifth again, as he did in his last questioning for more than 4 hours.
This time around, we're understanding, as per initial reports, of course, we'll still await more detail, that he was questioned for almost about 7 hours. How serious do you think the investigation is? And what does this largely mean as far as 2024 is concerned? Again, I was asking my colleague this as well. Last week, post the arraignment, Donald Trump said, even if I'm convicted, I will run. But how do things change for him come 2024 if any of these allegations are proven?
Well, I'm going to make two fundamental points. I think the first is that in any legal system, whether it be in India, whether it be in the United States or another country, you have to uphold that system for the sake of responsibility and accountability. If you try to undermine the legal system, then no one can believe in it. And the second point is that is what Donald Trump and his allies will do. They will try to, again, what I call gaslight you, which is they will make Trump the victim and blame everyone else, the district attorney, the judge, the prosecutors, the grand jury, the judge's wife, the prosecutor's wife. They'll blame anyone else in an attempt to tear down that legal system. And one of the things they'll say is, oh, if you put me on trial, it will only help me get reelected in 2024. Look, we're still almost a year away from the first Republican primary. We are 19 months away from the U.S. general election. Any attempt to bring in political considerations is putting your thumb on the scale of justice and threatening to undermine the legal system. And that's a game I don't want to play, even if it's the one that Donald Trump is relying on to try to escape accountability.
Okay, we'll really have to leave the conversation there, and we'll have to see how the developments play out and what does this actually mean for the future of Donald Trump.